While many African states continue to hold frequent elections in the name of democracy, many leaders continue to ruin their economies due to maladministration and corruption.
I can use some very horrible examples. You look at Bokassa in the Central African Republic, look at Mobutu Sese Seko, and a few living examples that I won't mention, which really, there's a culture of fear. People, you shouldn't fear the government. You shouldn't fear your government. You should be able to your government should serve you. All right. Yes. So that's why there is a change in terminology. For example, you don't talk about prison service. You talk correctional services. It will be an opportunity for me to share my experiences, especially over the past 7 years, holding the government of South Africa accountable at all levels. Right here, we're talking about the national executive at national level, right up to the president. You're talking about provincial, local, and municipalities are by far the core face of where people meet service delivery. You're talking about state-owned enterprises. You see, I'm sure you're reporting about the strike currently, South African Airways. A lot of those are governance issues, not necessarily labor issues. Governance issues. Ethiopian Airlines is able to function as a spectacular, splendid airline. And compare South Africa's economy with that of Ethiopia. Right? I know people say, Ethiopia is a hub, people come in and out. That's not enough of an excuse. It's a governance issue. So
Malunga believes it is strong institutions that has saved even South Africa from imminent democratic collapse.
It's a very interesting thing that in South Africa, there are these institutions that were created for the executive to account to. But the executive sometimes, does it very grudgingly. So they are a thorn, a necessary thorn in the side of government. And I think this is probably what in my subjective view, these institutions are what has saved South African democracy.
While many are hard-working citizens, the culture of impunity is weighing down the trust of many.
And of course, a culture where impunity is tolerated and you look the other way is not acceptable. I mean, yesterday you saw in Zimbabwe people were being beaten. And not even a single statement from the peer review mechanisms and the multilateral organizations. The lesson that the Basotho nation has to take really is the issue of strong institutions. Big institutions, smaller people.
For the new generation to have a stake in the future of Africa we all want, Africa needs to speak in unison against corruption and deal decisively with those who perpetuate it, regardless of their social rank. SABC News, Masego Lesotho.